My name is Brenna Wilcox, and I was 17 years old the night I learned my seat in the evacuation car had been traded for a jewelry case, two laptops, and my brother's duffel bag. The hurricane was still 3 hours away when everyone started moving fast, but nobody was moving like they cared whether I made it out. Designer luggage went into the trunk first, then bank folders, chargers, a locked metal box, photo albums, and every expensive thing that had ever been displayed in our living room, like proof we were a perfect family. I stood near the back door with Ranger's leash wrapped around my wrist, waiting for someone to tell me which car I was riding in. Nobody did. My brother climbed into the last open seat with his backpack on his lap, and did not even look guilty. My father checked the front lock twice, then turned to me and said someone had to protect Harborline Motor Lodge. My mother would not meet my eyes. She only pointed toward the hall and told me to stay inside, keep the dog quiet, and stop making everything harder. Then I heard the hammer. She fastened the storm shutter over my bedroom window from the outside, each hit sounding less like protection and more like a decision. When I asked why she was doing that, she said it was for my safety. My father walked to the breaker box and cut the power before the first real wall of rain even reached us. The whole lodge went black. Ranger pressed against my leg, shaking so hard his collar tags clicked together. Through the front window, I watched both cars pull away with my family, my brother, and everything they believed was worth saving. That night, the wind screamed so loud I could not tell if the roof was breaking or if I was. But 9 years later, when my phone lit up with 88 missed calls, I finally understood something. They had not forgotten me in that storm. They had counted on me staying buried inside it. Before I tell you what happened after that, tell me this. Have you ever had one moment where you realized your family only valued you when you were useful to them? My father's name was Darren Wilcox, and what made him dangerous was not that he looked cruel. It was that he looked responsible. He was the kind of man neighbors trusted during storm season because he worked as a deputy coordinator at the County Emergency Operations Office. He knew evacuation zones, bridge closures, flood maps, power grid warnings, and exactly how fast a hurricane could turn a wooden building into loose boards and broken glass. My mother, Valerie Wilcox, owned a small private daycare and chaired every parent safety committee she could find. Online, she posted about protecting children, preparing families, and teaching compassion. In public, she smiled like kindness was a language she had invented. At home, that language never reached me. My brother Logan was 2 years younger, but somehow he was treated like the person our family had been waiting for. When he forgot homework, he was overwhelmed. When I got straight A's, I was doing what was expected. When he wanted new sneakers, he was growing. When I needed a winter coat, I was told to check the donation box at the church. Logan got rides, upgrades, birthday dinners, and soft voices. I got chores, warnings, leftovers, and the kind of silence that teaches a kid not to ask twice. Harborline Motor Lodge had been part of my life for as long as I could remember, but it never felt like home. It felt like a place I worked in without being paid. I cleaned rooms after weekend guests left sand in the sheets. I restocked towels. I walked Ranger. I checked locks. I swept the office. I smiled at visitors because Valerie said no one wanted to rent from a family with a moody daughter. Aunt Tricia Monroe lived in one of the back units after what she called a temporary setback. Temporary lasted 6 years. She never paid rent, never helped with repairs, and somehow always had enough energy to criticize me. She called Logan baby and called me difficult. She said I had a face that made people uncomfortable, like I was always waiting for an apology. Maybe I was. The only person who ever saw me clearly was Nana Mabel Langford. She did not live at Harborline, but she was the reason it still existed. She knew which rooms leaked, which pipes needed work, and which bills my parents pretended not to see. She took me to lunch when everyone else forgot my birthday. She taught me how to drive in the empty parking lot behind a closed pharmacy. She bought Ranger his first real dog bed because she said no creature should sleep on a towel forever. When I was younger, I thought she was just extra loving. When I got older, I understood she was trying to fill a hole my parents kept digging deeper. After Hurricane Willa passed, my family came back smelling like hotel soap and fast food. Valerie walked into the lobby and asked if the front desk computer was damaged. Darren checked the office safe before he looked at my face. Logan complained that the hotel Wi-Fi had been slow. Aunt Tricia said she had barely slept because the people in the next room were too loud. I stood there with scratches on my arms from dragging broken boards away from the hallway, my voice shaking as I told them I thought Ranger and I were going to die. Valerie sighed like I had spilled something expensive. She said, "Brenna, do not be dramatic. You are standing right here." Darren told me I had handled responsibility and should be proud. Logan laughed and said he wished someone trusted him enough to guard the place. Aunt Tricia looked at my wet clothes and said some girls would be grateful to be treated like an adult. That was the moment something in me went quiet. Not healed, not forgiven. Quiet. I stopped trying to make them understand because I finally understood them. The storm had not changed my family. It had only stripped away the paint. I was not their daughter when it mattered. I was the person they left behind to protect their property, while they protected their favorite child. For the rest of that year, I became very good at being invisible. I stopped asking for rides. I stopped telling Valerie when I was sick. I stopped reacting when Logan joked that I was the house ghost. I kept my head down, saved every dollar I made from weekend cleaning jobs, and started writing things down. Dates, comments, bills, storm damage, photos of repairs they ignored, screenshots of messages where they asked me to handle things no kid should have carried alone. Silence became my shield, but memory became my weapon. By the time I graduated high school, people said I was mature, focused, and unusually calm under pressure. They did not know calm was just what happened when panic ran out of room. I applied to colleges without telling anyone except Nana Mabel. She sat across from me at a diner booth, stirring cream into her coffee while I showed her scholarship forms and financial aid letters. She did not ask why I wanted to leave. She asked how much it would cost to keep me gone. I almost cried right there, not because of the money, but because nobody had ever spoken about my freedom like it was something worth planning for. I chose a program in emergency shelter operations, public safety grants, and nonprofit compliance. When people asked why a girl my age wanted to study evacuation procedures, disaster housing, and emergency funding rules, I said storms interested me. That was easier than saying I wanted to understand every system my family had used as an excuse. Darren knew the rules and ignored them. Valerie preached safety and abandoned it. I wanted to know what responsibility looked like when it was written in law, contracts, reports, and signatures. College did not magically fix me. Freedom is not a clean door closing behind you. The first time a thunderstorm knocked out power in my dorm, I locked myself in the bathroom with my knees against my chest until my roommate found me. The first time someone invited me home for Thanksgiving, I lied and said my family was expecting me. But slowly, I built a life that did not require the Wilcox house to approve of me. I worked at the campus housing office, then volunteered at a temporary shelter after a tropical storm, then interned with a nonprofit that helped families evacuate with pets. I learned how many people refused to leave danger because shelters would not take their animals. I learned how easily poor planning turns fear into a trap. I learned how paperwork could save people when emotion failed them. Every form I filed, every report I wrote, every inspection checklist I studied felt like another lock turning between me and the girl they left in the dark. My parents rarely called. When they did, it was never to ask if I was happy. Darren wanted me to explain a county letter. Valerie wanted help filling out a reimbursement form. Logan wanted money for a car repair and called it a loan, even though he had never paid back anything in his life. Aunt Tricia sent me one message asking if I could get her a discount on flood insurance, then called me stuck up when I said no. I learned to answer in emails, not phone calls. I learned to keep every message. I learned that people who rewrite history hate written records. Nana Mabel called every Sunday evening. She asked what I ate, whether I had slept, whether I had laughed that week, and whether rangers still looked at thunderstorms like they had personal intentions. She never pushed me to forgive. She never told me blood was everything. Once, when I said I felt guilty for not missing home, she said, "Baby, sometimes what you miss is not the place. It is the version of the place you deserved." By 24, I was working for Safe Haven Relief Homes, a nonprofit that helped convert older properties into certified emergency housing for families with children and pets. We inspected buildings, applied for grants, coordinated with counties, and made sure emergency shelters were not just legal on paper, but safe in real life. I was good at it because I knew what danger looked like when adults dressed it up as responsibility. I knew how fear sounded when a child stopped asking for help. I had not planned to return to Harborline Motor Lodge. I told myself that place belonged to my past. Then Nana Mabel asked me to visit one Saturday afternoon, and everything I thought I had escaped came back with a key, a will, and a truth my parents had spent years hiding. Nana Mabel was sitting on her porch when I arrived, wrapped in a pale yellow sweater even though the air was warm. Ranger, older now but still loyal to every inch of me, rested his head on her shoe, like he knew the conversation would matter. She had a folder on the table between two glasses of iced tea. I remember staring at that folder before she said a word, because in my line of work I had learned that paper could change lives faster than shouting ever could. She told me Harborline Motor Lodge was not Darren and Valerie's property. It never had been. The land, the office, the back units, the parking lot, all of it belonged to her. My parents had moved in when I was little because they said they needed time to get steady. Darren had promised it would only be temporary. Valerie had promised they would pay fair rent once the daycare became profitable. Then years passed. They paid late, then less, then sometimes not at all. Nana covered property taxes. Nana covered insurance. Nana paid for roof patches and plumbing repairs while my parents told people they were carrying the burden of an old family business. I felt sick listening to it, not because I was surprised they lied, but because I finally saw the size of the lie. They had not just taken space from me, they had taken advantage of the one person who loved me. Nana said she had blamed herself for too long. She thought if she gave them stability, they might become kinder. She thought if they were less stressed, they might love me better. Then Hurricane Willa happened, and she stopped making excuses for them. She found out what they had done 2 days later, when I showed up at her house with Ranger, and no voice left from crying. She told me she had never forgiven herself for not forcing me to leave with her that week. I told her she had been the only adult who ever tried. She touched my hand and said, "That lodge protected people who never protected you. When I am gone, I want it to protect something better." I told her not to do it. I knew what would happen. Valerie would cry to everyone. Darren would call me greedy. Logan would talk about fairness as if fairness had ever lived in our family. Aunt Tricia would accuse me of manipulating an old woman from inside a unit she had never paid for. Nana listened, then smiled in that tired way older women smile when they have survived too much nonsense to be impressed by it. She said, "Let them talk. People who live on borrowed kindness always scream when the bill arrives." 2 years later, Nana Mabel passed away quietly in her sleep after feeding the stray cats behind her house. That detail broke me more than the funeral. Even on her last morning, she had been taking care of something hungry. At the service, Valerie cried loudly into a tissue and accepted hugs like she had been a devoted daughter every day of her life. Darren stood stiff beside her, serious and respectable. Logan checked his phone until someone mentioned property. Aunt Tricia whispered that Nana had always been too soft on me. I said nothing. Silence had become a room I knew how to stand in. The will was read a week later. I was not in the room with them. My attorney called me afterward, and 10 minutes later my phone began ringing like a fire alarm. Valerie left a voicemail that started with confusion and ended with rage. Darren texted, Call me now. Logan sent a long message about family unity. Aunt Tricia said I had poisoned Nana against her own blood. I read every word, then put my phone face down and went back to work. I could have evicted them immediately, but that would have made their story too easy. They would have told the town I threw grieving parents onto the street. So I did what my career had trained me to do. I used structure. I sent a formal lease at market rate with clear rules. Only Darren and Valerie were approved tenants. Aunt Tricia was not authorized to live there. No long-term guests without written permission. No private rentals. No property changes. No interference with inspections, sale discussions, permits, grants, or nonprofit partnerships. Maintenance requests had to be submitted in writing. Payments were due on the 1st. Late fees applied after the 5th. They had 30 days to sign or vacate. Valerie called it humiliating. Darren called it disrespectful. Logan called it disgusting. Aunt Tricia said Nana would be ashamed. They signed on day 29. I stared at their signatures for a long time. The same people who once decided I did not deserve a seat in the evacuation car now needed my permission to sleep under that roof. For the first time in my life, power did not sound like shouting. It sounded like paper sliding into a file. For almost 3 years, I kept everything professional. I did not visit for holidays. I did not answer guilt calls. I did not argue over childhood. Rent was due, receipts were filed, repairs were documented, and every conversation stayed in writing. Valerie hated that most. She wanted phone calls where she could cry, sigh, accuse, and twist the story before I could hold it still. Darren hated it too because email made his short commands look exactly as cold as they were. Logan ignored the arrangement until he needed something. Aunt Tricia pretended the lease did not apply to her because pretending had always been her rent payment. At first, the money came in late but complete. Then it came in later. Then 1 month arrived with half the amount and a note from Valerie saying family should understand hardship. I replied with the clause about late fees. 2 weeks after that, Mr. Arthur Bellamy, the retired teacher who lived across the road from Harborline, sent me a photo. Aunt Tricia was standing outside the back units in a robe, watering plants like she owned the place. Another photo came a week later. Logan's truck was parked behind the office beside stacks of rental furniture. Then I found listings online for weekend storage and staging services connected to his new vacation rental side business. He was using my property to support a business he had never told me about. Around that same time, Logan suddenly became friendly. He texted, "Hey Brenna, been thinking about you. Hope life is good." I stared at the message and almost laughed. Logan had never thought about me unless someone behind him needed access. 4 messages later, the reason showed up. He said Dad's blood pressure was bad. Mom was overwhelmed. The lodge was too much for them. Moving would crush them. Then came the phrase that told me everything. Maybe we can find a family solution. In my family, solution always meant sacrifice from me. He said they had gathered money by emptying savings, borrowing from church friends, selling Darren's fishing boat, and pressuring him to contribute. They wanted to buy Harborline Motor Lodge at what he called a family price. The amount he named was insulting. The land alone was worth several times that, especially after the county announced new funding for storm-safe lodging. I asked what family price meant. Logan said it meant not treating the people who raised me like strangers. I wrote back, "People who raise children do not leave them in a Category 4 hurricane with a dog and a dead phone." He did not reply for 11 minutes. Then he said I needed to move forward. That was when I told him I was not selling to them. In fact, I was already in talks with Safe Haven Relief Homes to renovate Harborline into certified emergency lodging for families evacuating with children and pets. The office would become a storm coordination center. The back units would be upgraded with reinforced doors, backup power, pet crates, medical storage, and safe rooms. Nana Mabel's property would become what she always wanted it to be, a place where people were not left behind. The reaction was immediate. Valerie called 14 times. Darren sent one message that said, "You have no idea how this county works." Logan wrote that I was ruining a chance to keep the lodge in the family. Aunt Tricia posted online about greedy young people destroying their elders for profit. Within a week, the town had a new version of me. According to Valerie, I had manipulated Nana Mabel when she was confused. According to Darren, I was an unstable woman with a grudge. According to Logan, I wanted to cash out by handing a family property to outsiders. According to Aunt Tricia, I had always hated them because I was jealous of my brother. Valerie went door to door with red eyes and a soft voice, telling people she was scared of what I might do next. Darren hinted to old co-workers that the permit process needed careful review. Logan used his real estate contacts to ask questions about Safe Haven and spread doubts about the project. Aunt Tricia live-streamed from the back unit she was not supposed to occupy, saying some people cared more about money than blood. For a moment, I almost admired their teamwork. They had never protected me with that much energy. I hired Maya Rosenthal, a property attorney with a calm voice and no patience for emotional theater. I sent her everything: the lease, payment records, photos from Mr. Bellamy, screenshots of Logan's messages, Valerie's posts, Darren's text about the county, a video from a maintenance inspection showing Aunt Tricia's clothes, medication, and mail inside the back unit. Maya read through it all and said, "They made this easier than they think." The unauthorized occupancy alone was enough to move against them. The business use without approval added another violation. The public lies could support a defamation warning if they interfered with the safe haven agreement. But Maya said something more important. Do not fight every rumor. Fight the ones that matter in the room where decisions are made. That room was the county permit hearing. My family planned to bring tears, reputation, and old connections. I planned to bring receipts. The permit hearing was held in a low brick county building that smelled like paper, floor polish, and old coffee. Every chair squeaked. Every whisper seemed to carry. Darren and Valerie arrived early and sat near the front like respectable victims. Logan wore a blazer and his real estate smile. Aunt Tricia sat behind them with folded arms, ready to look wounded on command. I came with Maya Rosenthal, a folder thick enough to make Valerie stop smiling for half a second. Across the aisle sat two representatives from Safe Haven Relief Homes. Behind me, Mr. Arthur Bellamy gave me a small nod. That nod steadied me more than any speech could have. Safe Haven presented first. Their plan was clean, practical, and exactly what Harborline needed. The lodge would not be torn down. It would be reinforced. Storm-rated windows, backup generators, pet-safe rooms, emergency supplies, clear evacuation partnerships, temporary lodging for families who had nowhere safe to go with children and animals. They showed diagrams, budgets, inspection timelines, and safety improvements. The board listened carefully. Then public comments opened, and Valerie stood up like she had been waiting for her cue. She wore a soft cream sweater, the kind she used when she wanted strangers to trust her. Her voice trembled as she said, "I had changed after leaving home." She said I was forcing my aging parents out of the only home they had left. She said Nana Mabel would never have wanted the property turned into a nonprofit project controlled by outsiders. She said she feared I was using tragedy for attention and money. Darren spoke next. He did not cry. He used authority. He said he had worked in emergency operations for years and had concerns about traffic, liability, and whether Safe Haven understood local storm behavior. He said the board should not rush because family disputes could cloud judgment. Logan followed with a polished little speech about community values. He said I had not lived in Port Reading for years and did not understand what Harborline meant to people. Aunt Tricia said she had watched me become bitter and cold. I let every one of them finish. Then Maya touched my folder and whispered, "Steady." I stood. My hands were cold, but my voice was not. I introduced myself as Brenna Wilcox, legal owner of Harborline Motor Lodge. I said the board had been asked to consider rumors, so I would provide records. First, I showed the deed, then the lease, then the occupancy clause. I showed the payment history and the late notices. I showed photos proving Aunt Tricia had been living in a unit she was never authorized to occupy. Aunt Tricia whispered that I was spying on family. Maya calmly said the photos were taken from public view and during lawful inspection. I showed screenshots of Logan asking me to sell the property at a family price far below market value while using the parking area for his business. Logan's face went red. Then I read Darren's message aloud. You have no idea how this county works. One board member leaned forward and asked Darren what he meant by that. Darren said it had been taken out of context. I looked at him and said, then I would like to provide the context. I opened the last section of my folder. The weather report from Hurricane Willa, mandatory evacuation notices, bridge closure times, emergency alerts, wind speeds, flood maps. I had not planned to make that night the center of the hearing, but they had built their defense on safety, family, and community trust. So I told the truth those words deserved. I said I was 17 when Hurricane Willa hit. I said my family packed my brother, valuables, paperwork, and luggage into 2 vehicles. I said I was left behind with Ranger, the dog, because someone had to protect Harborline. I said my bedroom storm shutter was fastened from the outside. I said the main breaker was cut before the storm arrived. I said I spent the night in the dark, listening to the roof strain while Ranger shook against me. I did not cry. That mattered. People expect pain to beg. Mine stood there with documents. The room went so quiet I heard a pen drop. One board member asked Darren if he had been working in emergency operations at that time. Darren said yes, but that had nothing to do with the permit. The board member asked if he understood the danger of leaving a minor in a coastal structure during a Category 4 storm under evacuation order. Darren looked at me for the first time that day. He said I was almost 18. Someone in the back of the room muttered, "Almost is not adult." Another board member asked if he had cut the power. Darren said it was to prevent electrical fire. I said, "Then why did you leave every charger, flashlight, and battery pack in the car with Logan?" Valerie started crying. It was the same cry she had used for years, but this time no one moved toward her. The room did not soften. It hardened. Logan stared at the table. Aunt Tricia looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Darren tried one more time. He said families make mistakes under pressure. I said, leaving me there was not the only choice. Coming home and calling me dramatic was another. Lying about me for 9 years was another. Using your county connections to interfere with a safety project was another. None of those were pressure. They were pattern. The permit chair asked Maya if Safe Haven was prepared to proceed if the current tenants vacated. Maya said yes, and also noted lease violations, unauthorized occupancy, business misuse, and interference with the owner's lawful project. The vote took less than 10 minutes. Approved. Unanimously. I watched Valerie's face collapse when she realized tears had failed. I watched Darren's authority shrink in a room full of people who had finally seen what he used it for. I watched Logan understand that his Good Son Act could not survive the paperwork. Aunt Tricia walked out before the meeting fully ended. Outside, Mr. Bellamy hugged me and said Nana Mabel would have been proud. I made it to my car before my legs started shaking. Not from fear, from release. For 9 years, the storm had lived inside me like unfinished business. That day, it finally moved into the room where it belonged. 6 days later, Maya served the formal notice. Because of lease violations and interference, Darren and Valerie had 45 days to leave Harborline. Aunt Tricia had to vacate immediately. Darren was also reported to the county ethics office for implying he could influence the permit process through his position. By sunset, my phone started lighting up. Valerie. Darren. Logan, Aunt Tricia, relatives who had ignored me for years. People who never asked where I was during Hurricane Willa suddenly had opinions about Mercy. I did not answer. I looked at the screen, at the growing number of missed calls, and remembered the night my phone died in the dark while no one came back for me. This time, I was not the one begging to be saved. On the 45th day, I returned to Harborline Motor Lodge with Maya, a sheriff's deputy, and Ranger sitting in the back seat like an old soldier who had earned the right to witness the ending. Valerie stood near the office door with swollen eyes and a cardboard box in her hands. She said the apartment they found was too small. She said Darren's job was under review. She said Logan was furious. She said Aunt Tricia had nowhere decent to go. She said I was tearing the family apart. I looked at the building behind her, at the storm shutters, the cracked sign, the office window where I had watched them drive away 9 years earlier, and I said, "No, I am just not holding it together with my silence anymore." Darren carried boxes without speaking. He looked smaller than I remembered, not because he had changed, but because I no longer saw him through fear. Logan tried to talk to me near the parking lot. He said I had gone too far. He said public humiliation was cruel. I told him public truth only feels cruel to people who benefited from private lies. Aunt Tricia left in a rented van, complaining loudly that Nana Mabel had ruined everyone by spoiling me. Nobody answered her. By that night, my phone showed 88 missed calls. Valerie left messages saying they had made one mistake. Darren texted, "Please stop." Logan sent paragraphs about forgiveness. Relatives sent Bible verses, family quotes, and warnings that revenge would poison me. I replied once, in a group message, because I wanted no one to misunderstand me again. When I was 17, Darren and Valerie evacuated with Logan and their valuables, left me behind with Ranger during Hurricane Willa, secured my window from the outside, cut the power, and came back calling me dramatic. For 9 years, many of you believed their version because it was easier than asking me for mine. Do not contact me to defend the consequences they earned. No one replied. Consequences came quietly after that. Darren was removed from public-facing emergency duties, while the ethics review moved forward. Men who used to clap him on the shoulder at county events suddenly kept conversations short. Valerie stepped down from the daycare safety committee after parents began asking why someone who preached child protection had left her own daughter in a hurricane. Enrollment dropped. Her online posts about compassion disappeared. Logan lost the investor he had been courting because nobody wanted a real estate deal attached to a scandal and a failed permit objection. Aunt Tricia ended up renting a room over a laundromat and, for the first time in years, had to pay for the space she occupied. I did not celebrate the way people think revenge should be celebrated. I did not dance in the parking lot. I did not scream. I walked through Harborline with Ranger beside me and opened every door. Some rooms smelled like dust and salt. Some walls needed repair. Nana Mabel's old office chair was still behind the desk. I sat there for a long time and let myself grieve, not for the family I lost, but for the family I should have had. Safe Haven began renovations 2 months later. They replaced weak windows with storm-rated glass. They installed backup generators and emergency lighting. They built a pet intake room with crates, food storage, and washable floors. They created a children's quiet room with blankets, books, and charging stations. They painted the office a warm blue because Nana Mabel had always said blue made frightened people breathe slower. Near the front desk, I placed a framed photo of Nana Mabel holding Ranger when he was a puppy. Under it, a small plaque read, "The Iris and Ranger Safe Passage Fund, created to help families, children, and pets evacuate safely before disaster strikes." Part of the money from the project went into that fund. It paid for pet carriers, motel vouchers, gas cards, battery packs, diapers, medication coolers, and emergency education workshops for families who thought they had no options. That mattered to me because the lesson was never just revenge. Children are not property guards. Pets are not excuses. Safety is not a privilege reserved for the favorite child. Family is not proven by who shares your name, cries the loudest, or claims the house after someone dies. Family is proven by who protects you when leaving you behind would be easier. I learned that forgiveness without accountability can become permission for the next cruelty. I also learned that justice does not have to make you cruel. Sometimes justice is a locked door. Sometimes it is a signed notice. Sometimes it is telling the truth in a room where liars expected your silence. And sometimes it is turning the place that hurt you into shelter for someone else. I do not hate Darren, Valerie, Logan, or Aunt Tricia. Hate would still tie me to them, and I spent too long trapped in their version of my life. What I feel now is distance, and distance can be holy when it saves you. 9 years ago, they drove away with every valuable thing they could fit into a car and left me in the dark with a shaking dog. They thought that night would teach me I was disposable. Instead, it taught me what never to become. I survived the storm they abandoned me in. Then I built a place where other people would not have to.
Our team is dedicated to creating original fictional stories with emotion, conflict, and lesson that can be useful to viewers. Everything in these videos made only for storytelling, education, and entertainment. We hope it reminds you that people who take care of your kindness for granted do not deserve unlimited access to your life.